Long before written laws or modern governments, ancient societies found strength in something far more mysterious: rituals so powerful they could bind entire civilizations together. Picture a gathering under the moonlit sky where elders chanted sacred words passed down for centuries, or warriors sealed lifelong bonds by mingling their blood in solemn ceremony. These weren't just traditions, they were the invisible threads weaving communities into unbreakable tapestries of trust and belonging. Across deserts, jungles, and mountain peaks, from the Aztecs to the Druids, people discovered that rituals could do what no army or ruler ever could: create unity out of chaos. What if I told you that some of these rituals were so intricate, so deeply symbolic, that their meanings are still debated by scholars today? Take the Egyptian opening of the mouth ceremony, where priests used golden tools to symbolically revive the dead for the afterlife, or the Viking blot sacrifices, where offerings to the gods forged a sacred covenant between humans and the divine. These weren't mere performances, they were acts of shared identity, reminding everyone present that they were part of something far greater than themselves. And here's the astonishing part: many of these rituals worked so well that they outlasted empires, surviving wars, migrations, and the rise and fall of dynasties. That's exactly what we're about to uncover in this journey through 42 of history's most fascinating rituals. You'll witness how a simple dance could unite scattered tribes, how a shared meal could turn strangers into family, and how the stars themselves became part of ceremonies that transcended language and time. Some of these practices will feel eerily familiar, echoing in our modern holidays and traditions, while others will seem utterly alien, proof of humanity's boundless creativity in seeking connection. So settle in, because we're not just exploring the past, we're rediscovering the timeless human need to belong, to believe, and to bind our lives together in ways that even time cannot erase. Among the vast steppes of ancient Eurasia, where the wind carried whispers of both war and kinship, the Scythians practiced a ritual so potent it turned battle-hardened warriors into brothers. When two men dipped their blades into each other's wounds, letting their blood mingle in a cup of wine, they weren't just sharing a drink, they were intertwining their fates. Imagine the weight of that moment: the metallic scent of blood blending with earthy wine, the low hum of chants invoking gods of war and sky, the stern gaze of elders watching as the cup passed between them. To drink from it was to swear an oath that transcended life itself. Breaking this bond wasn't merely dishonorable, it was an affront to the spirits, a curse that could follow a traitor even into the afterlife. But why blood? For the Scythians, it wasn't just a symbol, it was the very essence of life, carrying the soul's strength and courage. By mixing it, they believed they created something unbreakable, a bond no enemy could sever. Historical records tell of warriors who'd rather face death than betray this pact, their loyalty etched not in stone but in the very fabric of their being. And this wasn't some secret rite performed in shadows. It was a public declaration, a ritual witnessed by the community, because trust, in a world of shifting alliances, had to be as visible as the scars it left behind. Now consider how this contrasts with our modern handshakes or signed contracts. The Scythians didn't just promise, they became part of each other, a concept both beautiful and brutal. Their ritual reveals a universal truth: the deepest bonds often require sacrifice, a tangible piece of oneself given freely. And as we'll see, this idea echoes in rituals across the globe, from the shared meals of Pacific Islanders to the fire ceremonies of the Andes, proof that humanity has always sought ways to turn you and I into we. Deep in the heart of ancient Greece, under the cloak of night, thousands made the sacred pilgrimage to Eleusis not for treasure or glory, but for something far more precious, the promise of seeing life and death with new eyes. The Eleusinian mysteries weren't just rituals, they were transformative experiences so powerful that even today, after centuries of silence, their echoes still stir our curiosity. Imagine walking that dusty road from Athens, your feet aching, your stomach empty from days of fasting, all for the chance to stand in that torch-lit hall where secrets older than the Parthenon would unfold. What happened there, we may never know the full truth because speaking of it meant death, but fragments of hymns, artifacts, and whispers passed down through time paint a tantalizing picture. At the core of these mysteries lay the myth of Demeter and Persephone, a mother's grief and a daughter's journey to the underworld, mirroring the cycles of harvest, decay, and renewal. Initiates didn't just hear this story, they lived it. Through sacred dramas, perhaps even hallucinogenic brews made from barley Demeter's sacred grain, they experienced descent and return, despair and hope, as if walking Persephone's path themselves. One ancient writer called it the sight that stills the heart, a moment so profound it erased the fear of death. And that was the genius of Eleusis. It didn't preach or dictate. It offered an experience so visceral that participants left forever changed, bound together by a secret knowledge that transcended social class. Slaves stood beside philosophers, all equal in the eyes of the mystery. The secrecy wasn't just theater, it was the glue that held the ritual's power. Unlike public festivals where spectators watched, here every initiate was an actor in the sacred drama. That shared silence, the weight of knowing something words could never capture, created a bond stronger than blood. For over a millennium, through wars and plagues, this ritual endured, a testament to humanity's hunger for meaning. Even mighty leaders like Socrates and Cicero sought its wisdom, yet took its secrets to their graves. Now, contrast this with the next ritual we'll explore, a vibrant, public celebration where conflict wasn't buried in secrecy but transformed into unity through dance. Where Eleusis turned inward, the Tinku festival of the Andes turned outward, channeling the chaos of clashing communities into something astonishingly beautiful. High in the thin air of the Andes, where mountains scrape the sky and terraced fields cling to steep slopes, rival villages once gathered for a ritual that turned fists into offerings. The Tinku ceremony wasn't warfare, it was something far more profound. Picture this, hundreds of men and women, their faces painted with ancestral symbols, meeting at dawn in a highland basin. Drums pounded like heartbeats as opponents paired off, not to destroy one another, but to spill blood for the earth. Every blow, every drop that soaked into Pachamama's soil was a prayer for fertility, a plea for rain and abundant harvest. The fighting was fierce, broken noses, split lips, yet the crowd cheered not for victory, but for the sacred exchange taking place. What makes Tinku extraordinary isn't just its violence, but what happened after. When the last punch landed, fighters who'd moments ago traded blows now clasped hands, sharing chicha, a fermented corn drink from the same cup. Elders would press coca leaves to their wounds, not just as medicine, but as a symbol. Conflict had been transformed into nourishment for the community. This ritual didn't erase differences, it honored them. By allowing tensions to erupt in a sacred space, the Andean people prevented grudges from festering. The earth demanded balance, and so did they. Compare this to modern sports or even heated debates, our attempts to channel competition into something constructive. But Tinku went deeper. It acknowledged that conflict isn't the opposite of unity, it's often the path to it. The blood spilled wasn't just for crops, it was a reminder that every person, every village was interconnected in Pachamama's embrace. Even today, variations of Tinku survive, not as tourist spectacles but as living traditions where the past's wisdom still breathes. Now, let's cross an ocean to West Africa, where an entirely different kind of binding ritual unfolded, one that connected the living not through conflict, but through the whispered voices of ancestors. In the forests of Ghana, the Ashanti people practiced ceremonies where gold dust and sacred stools became bridges between worlds, proving that unity could be forged not just in the heat of battle, but in the quiet reverence of memory. In the swirling dust of Yoruba villages, when the drums begin their hypnotic rhythm and the air thrums with anticipation, something extraordinary happens. The ancestors walk among the living. The Egungun masquerade isn't just a performance, it's a sacred dialogue between worlds. Picture the towering, multi-layered costumes, each stitch pulsating with color and meaning, concealing the dancer beneath entirely. To the Yoruba people, this isn't disguise, it's transformation. The moment the mask settles into place, the dancer ceases to be themselves, becoming instead a vessel for generations past. What makes this ritual so powerful is its tangible connection to memory. When an Egungun dancer moves through the crowd, their sweeping gestures and deliberate steps aren't merely theatrical. They're delivering messages, blessings, warnings, or even humor straight from ancestors whose voices would otherwise be lost to time. Communities don't just watch, they interact, presenting offerings or whispering requests, their faith in the ritual as unshakable as the earth beneath their feet. And here's the brilliance of the design. Those elaborate costumes, often made from countless fabric strips, aren't just for show. They symbolize the collective strength of the community, each thread representing a life woven into the larger tapestry of history. But the Egungun tradition isn't frozen in the past. Modern adaptations see these masquerades addressing contemporary issues, offering commentary on politics, social justice, or environmental crises, proving that ancestral wisdom isn't static. It evolves, guiding the present while honoring what came before. Unlike rituals confined to temples or hidden chambers, this one spills into the streets, embracing everyone. A child's laughter mingles with the chants of elders, blurring the lines between reverence and celebration. Now, imagine a ritual where the bonds forged weren't with the departed, but with the living, where complete strangers became family through a single, shared act. From the vibrant chaos of Yoruba festivals, we journey to the Arctic's icy stillness, where the Inuit practiced a ritual of hospitality so profound it turned survival into solidarity. Beneath the flickering torchlight of a Viking longhouse, two warriors stood facing each other, their blades glinting in the dim glow. With a single swift motion, they sliced their palms open, not in anger but in solemn promise. As their blood dripped onto the earth, they clasped hands, their life force mingling in an oath older than the sagas themselves. This was Fostbreathralak, the Viking blood brotherhood, a bond so fierce it rewrote the very meaning of kinship. Imagine the weight of that moment, the sting of the wound, the iron scent of blood, the unspoken understanding that from this night forward, their fates were irrevocably tied. Unlike modern friendships sealed with handshakes or contracts, this ritual plunged deeper into the realm of myth and gods. The sagas tell of blood brothers who chose each other over flesh and blood family, defending their sworn kin even at the cost of their own lives. Take the legendary tale of Thorstein and Thorgeir, who performed the ritual as boys and grew into warriors inseparable in battle. When Thorgeir was slain, Thorstein didn't merely mourn, he hunted down the killers one by one, fulfilling his oath beyond death. What made this bond unbreakable wasn't just the physical act, but the sacred context. The ritual was performed before witnesses, yes, but also under the gaze of Odin, the god of oaths, and Tyr, the one-handed deity of justice. To break such a vow wasn't just dishonorable, it was sacrilege, inviting divine retribution and eternal shame. Yet Fostbreath Ralag wasn't solely about violence. At its core, it was a ritual of belonging. In a world where exile was a fate worse than death, where lone warriors rarely survived long, this act created artificial families bound by choice rather than blood. It's a concept that echoes in our modern adoptions or chosen families, but with a Viking twist. Their version came with axes and the looming shadow of Valhalla. Now shift your gaze from the frozen north to the sun-baked streets of Mesopotamia, where an entire city could unite not through blood, but through something equally potent, a shared feast that turned thousands of strangers into a single community. While the Vikings bonded pair by pair, the Babylonians wove their social fabric in grand, communal celebrations where every citizen, from baker to king, broke bread together under the eyes of their gods. At the break of dawn, when the first light touched the Acropolis, the streets of Athens would erupt in a sea of color and sound. The Panathenaic Festival wasn't just a religious event, it was the heartbeat of the city, a spectacle where every citizen, from the wealthiest archon to the humblest potter, had a role to play. Imagine the procession winding its way up the sacred way, a river of people carrying offerings, herding sacrificial animals, and singing hymns to Athena. At the center of it all, swaying gently on the shoulders of maidens, was the peplos, a robe woven over 9 months by the hands of Athens' finest artisans, its threads dyed with saffron and embroidered with scenes of the goddess' triumphs. This wasn't just fabric, it was a tapestry of civic pride, a physical manifestation of the city's devotion. What made the Panathenaea extraordinary was its inclusivity. Unlike many ancient rituals reserved for elites, this festival blurred social lines. Young men competed in foot races, their naked bodies gleaming with oil under the summer sun, while poets recited verses and musicians played lyres tuned to melodies older than the city itself. Even Metic's foreign residents, typically excluded from civic life, could march in the procession, their presence acknowledging their vital role in Athenian society. And when the sacrifices were made on Athena's altar, the scent of burning meat carried a message. This community thrived because it honored both its goddess and its people. The athletic competitions weren't mere entertainment. They mirrored the values Athens held dear: discipline, excellence, and the harmonious balance of mind and body. Winners received amphorae filled with sacred olive oil, pressed from trees said to be planted by Athena herself. These prizes weren't just valuable, they linked victory to divine favor, turning personal achievement into communal celebration. Meanwhile, the recitation of Homer's epics reminded everyone of their shared heritage, weaving myth into the fabric of daily life. But the true genius of the Panathenaea lay in its timing. Held every 4 years as a grander version of the annual festival, it created a rhythm to Athenian life, a recurring moment when the city paused to reaffirm its identity. In a world where rival city-states clashed over borders and trade, this ritual was a bulwark against division. When Athenians watched that peplos draped over Athena's statue, they didn't just see a robe, they saw themselves, their labor, and their unity reflected back at them. Now shift your gaze from the sunlit agora to the shadowy forests of Germania, where an entirely different kind of ritual unfolded, one that transformed fear of the unknown into a source of tribal strength. While Athens celebrated in the open, the Germanic tribes gathered in groves whispered to be gateways to the gods, proving that unity could be forged not just in joy, but in the quiet awe of the sacred. In the heart of Tenochtitlan, as the constellation of the Pleiades reached its zenith, an entire civilization held its breath. The Aztec New Fire ceremony wasn't just a ritual, it was a moment of collective reckoning, a gamble with the cosmos itself. Every 52 years, when the sacred calendar completed its cycle, priests would watch the night sky with trembling hands. If the stars failed to align, the world would end. Imagine the weight of that night. Every fire in the empire extinguished, pots shattered in the streets, pregnant women locked indoors lest they transform into monstrous beasts. The darkness wasn't just absence of light, it was the void waiting to swallow creation. Then, on the chest of a sacrificial captive, a priest would strike flint. The spark that leaped to life wasn't merely fire, it was the sun reborn, proof that the gods had granted humanity another cycle. Runners carried torches lit from this sacred flame to every corner of the empire, from the grand temples to the humblest hearth. As households rekindled their fires, they weren't just lighting cooking flames, they were pledging themselves anew to the cosmic order. The genius of this ritual lay in its duality. It acknowledged terror, the ever-present threat of apocalypse, while offering catharsis, the tangible relief of renewal. Even children understood the stakes, gathering to watch the fire's journey, their faces flickering with its glow. But the new fire ceremony did more than soothe fears. It physically bound the empire together. Those running torches traced invisible lines of connection, linking farmer and emperor, warrior and weaver in a shared moment of vulnerability and hope. The ritual's timing, spanning generations, meant no living person could remember the last one, making each ceremony a fresh encounter with the divine and the sacrificial victim. Their death wasn't just an offering, it was a transformation, their body becoming the conduit between humanity and the gods. Now, shift your gaze from the tense darkness of Tenochtitlan to the golden fields of ancient Canaan, where an entirely different ritual unfolded, one that turned gratitude into celebration. While the Aztecs wrestled with existential dread, the Israelites welcomed the harvest with the Feast of Weeks, a jubilant reminder that survival itself was cause for communal joy. As the first golden sheaves of grain were cut under the late summer sun, Celtic communities across ancient Ireland and Britain set aside their plows and swords for something far more vital, the festival of Lughnasadh. Named for the god Lugh, the master of all skills, this wasn't just a harvest celebration, it was a social alchemy that transformed rivalry into unity. Picture the scene, towering hilltops crowned with bonfires, the air thick with the scent of roasting meat and fresh baked bread, while below, warriors who might have clashed in battle just days ago now competed in feats of strength and speed. The chariot races alone could stir the gods, with horses' hooves pounding the earth like thunder, but the true magic lay in what happened between events. At Lughnasadh, every activity served a dual purpose. The athletic games weren't merely entertainment, they were tests of worthiness, where young men could prove themselves before potential brides and chieftains. The sprawling markets buzzing with traders from distant tribes weren't just about goods, they were diplomatic hubs where alliances formed over shared mead. Even the solemn trial of the first fruits, where the earliest harvest was offered to Lugh, doubled as a community audit if the offerings were meager. It signaled a need to redistribute resources before winter. And here's the stroke of genius. Temporary truces were enforced by sacred law, meaning disputes that might have sparked blood feuds were instead settled through poetry contests or wrestling matches, their outcomes binding. The festival's legacy lingers in places like the Hill of Tara, where the indentations of ancient chariot wheels still mark the earth. Modern reapers might use combines instead of sickles, but the spirit of Lughnasadh endures in county fairs and harvest festivals where communities still gather to celebrate abundance. What made this ritual timeless wasn't just its practical benefits ensuring food security and social harmony, but its recognition that gratitude thrives best when shared. The Celts understood something we often forget. Prosperity isn't just measured in bushels of grain, but in the strength of the hands that pass them around the fire. Now prepare to cross from the sunlit hills of Kelshire to the silent deserts of Australia, where an entirely different kind of bonding ritual unfolded, one that didn't rely on words at all. While Lughnasadh filled the air with laughter and song, the Aboriginal peoples of the outback communicated something deeper through the sacred lines of songlines, turning the very earth into a living map of connection. Under the vast desert sky, where the Milky Way stretches like a river of stars, the rhythmic thud of clapsticks and the haunting drone of didgeridoos signaled something extraordinary. A corroboree was about to begin. For Aboriginal Australians, these gatherings weren't just performances. They were the heartbeat of culture, a way to weave the past into the present with every stamp of bare feet on red earth. Picture the dancers, their bodies adorned with intricate white ochre patterns that shimmered in the firelight. Each line a chapter of the dreamtime, each dot a star in a celestial map only the initiated could fully decipher. When they moved, it wasn't merely to entertain. It was to resurrect ancestors, to trace the paths of creator spirits, and to imprint sacred knowledge onto the next generation. What made corroboree so powerful was their layered purpose. A single dance might teach hunting techniques through precise mimicry of kangaroos or emus, while another recounted the epic journeys of ancestral beings like the rainbow serpent. The songs, passed down over millennia, contained navigation cues, landmarks, water sources, even warnings embedded in their melodies, and the body paint. Far from decoration, it was a living language. Cross-hatched designs might denote clan affiliations, while zigzagging lines could map river systems critical for survival. This was knowledge transfer at its most visceral, where every element, sound, movement, visual art, worked in harmony to bind communities together, but the true brilliance lay in accessibility. Unlike rituals requiring temples or written texts, corroborees could unfold anywhere: a desert clearing, a riverbank, the shade of a gum tree. Everyone participated, elders led, children imitated, and even outsiders from distant tribes were welcomed, their presence strengthening the web of kinship that spanned the continent. The stories danced here weren't owned, they were shared, adapting subtly from region to region like a cultural heartbeat. Modern science now confirms what indigenous Australians knew instinctively: multisensory experiences create stronger memories. Those who danced the stories remembered them not just in their minds, but in their muscles and bones. Now, shift your gaze from the firelit outback to the torchlit tombs of ancient Egypt, where an entirely different ritual unfolded, one that didn't celebrate life through movement, but defied death through meticulous preparation. While corroborees pulsed with vitality, the Egyptian opening of the mouth ceremony sought to bridge the greatest divide of all, the threshold between this world and the next. High on the wind-scoured plateaus of Tibet, where the air is so thin it steals your breath, the dead give one final gift: their bodies return to the sky. The Tibetan Sky Burial, or Jeta, isn't merely a funeral rite. It's a sacred act of compassion so radical it redefines our relationship with mortality. Picture the scene: a body carefully folded into the fetal position, wrapped in white cloth, carried before dawn to a secluded rock slab known as the Sky Burial Platform. Monks chant prayers not in sorrow but in celebration, their voices mingling with the whistling wind as vultures circle overhead. When the Rajyapas, or body breakers, begin their work, it's not desecration, it's liberation. Flesh becomes sustenance for the birds, bones are ground with barley flour, and nothing remains but the echo of a life released back into the cycle of existence. What makes this ritual extraordinary isn't just its stark contrast to Western burial customs, it's the philosophy woven into every step. In Tibetan Buddhism, the body is an empty vessel after death, a temporary shell no more sacred than a discarded garment. By offering it to vultures, the deceased performs a final act of dana, or selfless giving, feeding creatures considered manifestations of Dakine's sky-dwelling deities. For mourners, witnessing this transformation isn't traumatic. It's a visceral lesson in impermanence, a reminder that even in decay, there's harmony. The vultures, soaring skyward with their offering, become living symbols of the soul's journey beyond physical form. Modern outsiders often recoil at the idea, but consider the ecological wisdom embedded in this practice. In a land where the frozen earth makes burial nearly impossible and timber for cremation is scarce, sky burials are both practical and profound. They leave no trace, demand no resources, and sustain other lives, a stark contrast to today's carbon-intensive funerals. And here's the deeper truth. This ritual doesn't deny grief, it reframes it. Families don't avoid the reality of death, they confront it directly, finding peace not in avoidance but in participation. When the last bone fragment is scattered, there's no grave to visit, only the boundless sky to remind them that loss and renewal are two sides of the same wind. Now shift your gaze from these austere heights to the lush valleys of ancient Crete, where an entirely different ritual celebrated not the release of the body, but the power of the divine feminine. While Tibetan monks sought unity through dissolution, the Minoans wove their community together in dances that honored the earth itself as a living, nurturing force. Beneath the autumn moon in ancient Athens, while men debated politics in the agora, the women of the city disappeared into the night, not in silence but in raucous laughter that echoed through the hills. This was the Thesmophoria, a 3-day festival so sacred that men who dared to spy on its rituals faced execution. Imagine the scene: aristocratic wives and servant girls side by side, their usual social barriers dissolved as they climbed the slopes to the sanctuary of Demeter. They carried piglets live, squirming offerings, and baskets filled with pine cones and cakes shaped like genitals. For these women, this wasn't just a religious duty, it was a reclaiming of power, a rare moment when their voices, jokes, and bodies became the center of the world. The rituals unfolded in layers of meaning. On the first day, the descent, women fasted and mourned like Demeter grieving her lost daughter Persephone. But the second day, the fasting, transformed sorrow into something electrifying. They hurled obscenities at each other, not random vulgarity, but ritualized laughter meant to echo the jesting of Iamb, the mythical servant whose crude jokes coaxed Demeter out of despair. Historians believe this cathartic release served a dual purpose. It honored the goddess while shattering the rigid propriety expected of Greek women. Then came the climax, the retrieval of decayed piglets buried months earlier. These rotting remains, mixed with seeds, were scattered across fields as potent fertilizer, linking women's bodies literally to the earth's fertility. What made the Thesmophoria revolutionary wasn't just its content, but its exclusivity. In a society where women were barred from voting, owning property, or appearing in public without male guardians, this festival carved out a space where they governed themselves. Priestesses presided, rules were set by consensus, and the usual hierarchies of wealth or status blurred. Even the obscene jokes held deeper significance. By mocking male sexuality and societal norms, women temporarily inverted the power structures that confined them. The piglets, too, were symbolic. Their decomposition and renewal mirrored the cycles of both agriculture and female biology, a visceral reminder that decay precedes rebirth. The festival's legacy lingers in unexpected places. modern scholars see echoes of the Thesmophoria in women's circles and harvest festivals worldwide, where laughter and shared labor still forge unbreakable bonds. But its true genius lay in its duality. It was both a devotional act and a subversive one, a reminder that even in the most patriarchal societies, women found ways to nurture their own sacred spaces. Now shift your gaze from the secretive hills of Greece to the open plains of Mongolia, where an entirely different ritual transformed hostility into kinship. While the Thesmophoria strengthened bonds among women, the Mongol Andi ceremony turned sworn enemies into brothers not through secrecy, but through a public spectacle of shared vulnerability and trust. Among the rolling prairies of North America, where bison herds painted the grasslands with movement, two warring tribes could halt years of bloodshed with a single object, the calumet or sacred pipe. More than just a smoking vessel, this intricately decorated pipe was a passport to peace, a bridge between worlds, and a living covenant with the divine. Picture the scene: leaders of rival nations seated in a circle, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of a central fire. As the pipe passed from hand to hand, its fragrant smoke, often blended with sacred tobacco, sweetgrass, or red willow bark, curled upward like visible prayers. To share the calumet wasn't merely a gesture, it was an unbreakable oath witnessed by the Great Spirit and the earth itself. The pipe's construction held layers of meaning. Its stem, typically carved from ash or cedar, represented the backbone of humanity, while the bowl, often crafted from red pipestone quarried from sacred sites like Minnesota's Pipestone National Monument, symbolized the heart. Feathers, beads, and dyed porcupine quills adorned its length, each element telling a story or invoking protection, but the true power lay in the ritual's precision. From the way the pipe was packed in, never with metal tools, only with bare hands, to the direction it was offered, first to the sky, then the earth, then the four cardinal directions, every motion acknowledged the interconnectedness of all things. Even the smoke had purpose. As it dissipated into the air, it carried the participants' words and intentions to the spirit world, making their promises binding in a way no written treaty could replicate. This ceremony wasn't reserved for grand treaties. Explorers like French trader Nicolas Perrot wrote of being welcomed into villages with the calumet, their status transforming from outsider to honored guest with a single puff. The Lakota, Pawnee, and other plains peoples used it to seal trade agreements, adopt orphans, or even halt battles mid-fight. Warriors would drop their weapons the moment the pipe appeared. What made this ritual so effective? It tapped into something deeper than law or logic. By sharing breath, the very essence of life, participants acknowledged their shared humanity. The calumet didn't erase differences. It created a space where differences could coexist. Now, contrast this with our modern contracts signed in sterile offices or digital agreements clicked without thought. The calumet ritual reminds us that trust isn't built through loopholes and legalese, but through sacred acts that engage the senses and the soul. Its legacy lingers today in the ongoing use of ceremonial pipes by indigenous leaders during important gatherings, a testament to rituals that endure because they speak to truths no document can capture. From the smoke-filled lodges of the plains, we now turn our gaze upward, to a ritual where the bonds forged weren't between people, but between humanity and the cosmos itself. While the calumet connected earthly communities, the ancient Babylonian Akitu festival tied an entire civilization to the rhythms of the stars, proving that rituals could stretch beyond the horizon of human relationships into the celestial realm. As the first light of spring touched the ziggurats of Babylon, the entire city held its breath for 12 extraordinary days. The ordinary rules of society would be upended. The Akitu festival wasn't just a celebration, It was a carefully orchestrated rebirth of the cosmos itself. Imagine the scene: the king, usually an untouchable figure of divine authority, kneeling before the statue of Marduk, stripped of his regalia, his face pressed to the temple floor as priests slapped him, a shocking act of ritual humiliation. This wasn't punishment, it was purification. The slap echoed through the chamber like thunder, a symbolic stripping away of the past year's failures, making way for renewal. Meanwhile, outside the temple walls, the streets pulsed with processions so lavish they'd put modern parades to shame. Golden statues of gods floated above the crowds on litters, their jeweled eyes reflecting the sun, while musicians played hymns older than the city's walls. At the heart of Akitu lay a profound theatrical performance, the reenactment of the Enuma Elish, Babylon's creation epic. Priests donned elaborate costumes to play Marduk's battle against Tiamat, the primordial dragon of chaos. Every sword clash, every chant wasn't mere storytelling, it was cosmic maintenance. The Babylonians believed rituals didn't just commemorate events, they recreated them, ensuring the universe's continued existence. And here's where it gets fascinating. The festival's climax involved the sacred marriage rite, where the king would symbolically unite with the goddess Histor, channeling fertility for both land and people. Temple records describe how the union was consummated in a private chamber, its success determining the year's prosperity, a reminder that divine favor wasn't guaranteed, but earned through human participation. But Akitu's true genius was its inclusivity. While the king underwent his ordeal, ordinary citizens engaged in their own acts of renewal, settling debts, releasing prisoners, even cleaning their homes with ritual precision. The entire society synchronized like cogs in a sacred machine, each person playing their part in the grand reset. Prophets would recite omens for the coming year, their words transcribed on tablets and disseminated throughout the empire, turning superstition into social glue. Unlike modern New Year's resolutions made in private, Akitu was collective transformation writ large, binding baker and bureaucrat alike to a shared destiny. From this spectacle of cosmic realignment, we journey now to a quieter but no less powerful ritual, one that didn't rely on grandeur to purify, but on the elemental simplicity of water. While Babylon renewed itself through drama and pageantry, the Shinto Misogi ceremonies of Japan achieved similar transcendence through icy streams and dawn-lit waterfalls, proving that purification could be as intimate as a single breath held beneath crashing waves. In the heart of ancient Rome, when winter's grip began to loosen, the city's streets erupted into a spectacle that would make even the most decadent emperors blush. The Lupercalia Festival wasn't just a ritual, it was a sanctioned explosion of chaos, where the usual order of society flipped upside down. Picture this: barefoot priests clad only in strips of freshly slaughtered goat hide, their bodies smeared with blood and milk, sprinting through the forum. Laughing women lined their path, arms outstretched, eager to be struck by the same gruesome thongs, not in punishment, but in hope. Each lash was believed to ward off infertility and ease childbirth, turning what might seem like brutality into an act of sacred absurdity. The genius of Lupercalia lay in its contradictions. It was both solemn and raucous, sacred and profane. The festival began in the Lupercal cave, where Romulus and Remus were said to have been nursed by the she-wolf, with the sacrifice of goats and a dog, animals representing lust and protection. Two young nobles, their foreheads smeared with the blood of the sacrifice, would then burst into laughter as priests wiped it away with wool dipped in milk. This moment of comic relief wasn't incidental. It was a calculated release valve for societal tension. For a few hours, plebeians could jest with patricians, and the rigid hierarchies of Rome softened under the weight of shared revelry. But Lupercalia's legacy extends far beyond antiquity. Its timing in mid-February and its focus on fertility and pairing young men drew women's names in a lottery-like ritual make it a clear ancestor to Valentine's Day. Yet where modern romance is privatized boxed chocolates, whispered sweet nothings, Lupercalia was unabashedly public, a reminder that love and fertility weren't private matters but communal concerns. The festival's endurance, surviving even Rome's Christianization before being repurposed, speaks to its primal power. Rituals that let people laugh at their own taboos often prove the hardest to erase. Now shift your gaze from the sunlit chaos of Rome to the quiet gloom of medieval Europe, where an entirely different ritual unfolded, one that didn't celebrate life's exuberance, but honored the dead with a solemnity that still echoes in our modern Halloween. While Lupercalia embraced the living with raucous energy, the Feast of All Souls wove the departed back into the fabric of the community, proving that bonds could transcend even the grave. As dusk settled over Japanese villages in mid-August, a hush would fall not of sorrow but of anticipation. The Bon Festival wasn't about mourning the dead, it was about throwing open the doors to the unseen world. Picture the scene, families scrubbing their homes spotless, arranging platters of ripe melons and steaming rice cakes on altars, lighting lanterns to guide ancestral spirits back from the darkness. The air hummed with the scent of incense and the rhythmic clack of wooden clappers, each sound a beacon calling across the veil. This was Obon, a Buddhist Confucian fusion where filial piety didn't end at the grave, it stretched into eternity. What made this ritual extraordinary was its duality. By day, villagers visited graves, scrubbing tombstones with buckets of water to cool their ancestors' spirits in the summer heat, a tender act of care as practical as it was symbolic. But come nightfall, the somber tones gave way to joy. Streets erupted with the pulsing beats of taiko drums and the swirling steps of Bon Odori dancers, their movements retelling folk tales and harvest legends. The dance's circular motions weren't just for show, they mirrored the cyclical nature of life and death, a physical reminder that no one truly leaves the community. Even the food offerings held layered meaning. Eggplant and cucumber spirit horses, skewered with wooden legs, served as vehicles for ancestors to travel between worlds, whimsical yet profound. The festival's climax came with Toro Nagashi, the lantern floating ceremony. Hundreds of paper lanterns, each inscribed with family names, drifted down rivers like a constellation of earthbound stars. As children splashed alongside them, their laughter mingling with the monks' chants, the ritual achieved something remarkable. It made the abstract tangible. Grief wasn't buried, it was transformed into light and motion, a shared experience that knit generations together. Modern psychologists might call this continuing bonds theory, the idea that healing comes not from letting go, but from finding new ways to connect. The Obon Festival had perfected this centuries ago. Now, shift your gaze from these lantern-lit waters to the scorching sands of Ethiopia, where an entirely different kind of ritual unfolded, one that didn't soothe the spirit through remembrance, but forged unbreakable strength through sheer endurance. While Japanese families celebrated continuity, the Hammer tribe's bull-leaping ceremony tested the limits of body and will, proving that some bonds are earned through pain and triumph. On the vast plains where buffalo still roamed in countless herds, young men stepped forward not to take lives, but to offer their own flesh in a sacred bargain. The sun dance wasn't merely a test of endurance, it was a living prayer, a 4-day symphony of movement, pain, and ecstasy that bound individual warriors to their people and the cosmos itself. Imagine the scene, the cottonwood tree at the center, carefully chosen for its straightness, stripped of branches and erected as the axis mundi connecting earth to sky. Around it, dancers moved in relentless circles, their chests or backs pierced with wooden skewers tied to ropes that pulled taut with every backward lean. The rhythm wasn't set by drums alone, but by the tearing of skin, the gasps of transcendence, the collective intake of breath from hundreds of onlookers who fasted and prayed alongside them. What made this ritual extraordinary wasn't the suffering itself, but its voluntary nature. Unlike rites of passage forced upon initiates, the sun dance called for those who chose to answer, a distinction that transformed agony into honor. Elders tell of warriors who danced until the skewers ripped free, their scars becoming lifelong badges of devotion. Visions came not through hallucinogens, but through the body's breaking point, where exhaustion blurred into revelation. Some saw buffalo herds stretching to the horizon. Others heard the voice of Wakan Tanka, the Great Spirit, whispering through the wind. But the true miracle occurred in the crowd. Mothers offering strips of their own flesh as prayer ties, children vowing to one day take their turn, elders weeping as they recognized the next generation's willingness to sacrifice for the people's survival. The sun dance's power lay in its communal mathematics, individual pain multiplied into collective strength. When a dancer faltered, the tribe's songs swelled to carry him. When blood touched the earth, it wasn't wasted. It fed the sacred circle just as buffalo fed the people. Modern eyes might see torture, but the Lakota, Cheyenne, and other Plains nations saw something different, the ultimate rebuttal to selfishness. In a world where European settlers hoarded resources, these cultures cultivated a radical idea that true leadership meant giving more than you took, even from your own flesh. Now shift your gaze from the dusty dance grounds to the gleaming halls of medieval Europe, where an entirely different ritual celebrated authority, not through personal sacrifice, but through divine theater. While the sun dance proved worthiness through endurance, the royal anointing ceremony transformed ordinary men into kings with a drop of oil and the weight of centuries-old tradition. When 3 decades had passed since a pharaoh's coronation, the Nile's banks transformed into a stage for one of Egypt's most extraordinary spectacles, the Heb-Sed Festival. Far more than a simple anniversary celebration, this was a high-stakes performance where the ruler's very right to govern hung in the balance. Picture the scene, the aging king, draped in the short, pleated kilt of his youth, sprinting between markers shaped like the boundaries of Egypt itself. His muscles burned, his breath came ragged, but the crowds lining the course didn't cheer, they watched in hushed awe. Every stride was a test not of speed but of divine favor. Could this man, now well into middle age by ancient standards, still embody the vigor of Horus? The answer would determine whether Egypt thrived or plunged into chaos. The festival's genius lay in its layered symbolism. After completing the ritual races, the pharaoh would make offerings to the gods in a pavilion supported by statues of the lioness Sekhmet, a nod to both protection and destruction. Then came the climax. Seated on a double throne representing Upper and Lower Egypt, he received the crook and flail anew, not from human hands but from the statues of deities themselves. This wasn't mere theater, it was cosmic renewal. By reenacting his coronation, the king reaffirmed the delicate balance of truth, justice, and natural order that kept the Nile flooding and the harvests abundant. The message to the people was clear. Their ruler still had the gods' endorsement, but the Heb-Sed wasn't just about the pharaoh. The weeks-long festivities included feasts where thousands dined on roast oxen and honey cakes, distributed by royal decree. Artisans crafted amulets bearing the Jubilee's emblem, a peculiar rectangular shrine with curved horns that commoners wore as talismans of national unity. Even the architecture participated. The step pyramid of Djoser still bears the ruins of his Heb-Sed court, its niches once housing statues of conquered foreign chiefs, a stone testament to Egypt's might. This ritual didn't just validate one man, it reassured an entire civilization that their place in the universe remained secure. Now, shift your gaze from the sun-baked plains of Egypt to the misty highlands of Mesopotamia, where an entirely different kind of renewal unfolded, one that didn't hinge on a ruler's athleticism, but on the precise alignment of stars and the collective hope of a civilization greeting another year. While the Heb-Sed tested individual endurance, the Babylonian Festival synchronized an entire empire with the rhythms of the cosmos, proving that time itself could be ritually reborn. Long before fireworks lit up city skylines, villagers in ancient China faced a terror that slithered out of the mountains each winter: the Nyan, a beast with the horns of a dragon and the appetite of a starving army. Legend whispered that this monster craved more than crops. It hungered for human flesh, especially the vulnerable young and old, but the people didn't cower. They fought back with something far more potent than weapons: collective imagination. As the coldest moon rose, entire villages transformed into living theaters. Farmers became lion dancers, their bodies swallowed by papier-mâché heads and rippling fabric manes, while children clanged pots and shouted riddles passed down from their great-grandparents. The chaos wasn't just noise, it was a carefully choreographed illusion, a communal bluff convincing the Nyan that this village was too fierce, too vibrant to devour. The dance's brilliance lay in its layered symbolism. Those flamboyant lion costumes weren't random. Their colors, fiery red and gold, mirrored the very elements the Nyan feared. Drums pounded like thunder, shaking the earth to mimic the voice of the gods, while firecrackers, originally bamboo stalks thrown into flames to explode with gunshot cracks, became the people's laughter in the face of dread. Even the timing held meaning. The ritual unfolded on the year's darkest night, when fear felt heaviest, proving that light could be conjured through unity. And it worked not because monsters were real, but because the ritual reframed collective anxiety into collective power. A shared story became shared survival. Today's Lunar New Year parades, with their acrobatic lion dances tumbling through crowded streets, are more than cultural holdovers. They're proof that rituals evolve without losing their soul. Modern firecrackers may be mass-produced, but they still carry the echo of those bamboo pops, the red envelopes given to children, originally talismans against the Nyan's hunger, now tokens of intergenerational love. This adaptability is the ritual's true magic. It honored tradition while making room for joy, allowing ancient fears to birth modern celebrations. Now, let's set sail from these firecracker-lit shores to the misty waters of the Pacific Northwest, where an entirely different kind of ritual unfolded, one that didn't scare away monsters, but invited the ocean's bounty through reverence and reciprocity. While the Chinese danced to repel terror, the Tlingit people of Alaska danced to welcome abundance, proving that rituals could be as much about invitation as they were about protection. Beneath the swaying palms of Polynesia, where the ocean's rhythm dictated the pace of life, a simple wooden bowl held the power to silence conflicts and unite entire villages. The kava ceremony wasn't just about drinking, it was a sacred social alchemy that transformed tension into trust. Picture the scene: elders seated cross-legged on woven mats, their faces illuminated by flickering torchlight as a young apprentice kneads the fibrous roots in a wooden trough. The liquid that trickles out isn't merely a beverage, it's liquid diplomacy, a muddy brew that carries the weight of tradition in every bitter sip. The ritual's genius lay in its meticulous choreography. From the order in which participants received their coconut shells, chiefs first, then commoners, to the precise clap of hands before drinking, every gesture reinforced hierarchy while simultaneously dissolving barriers. That first mouthful of kava, earthy and numbing, wasn't meant to be pleasant. Its bitterness served as a visceral reminder. Difficult conversations, like the drink itself, required patience and shared endurance. As the sedative properties took effect, tongues loosened, postures relaxed, and disputes that might have sparked violence hours earlier now unraveled into compromise. But the true magic of kava wasn't just in its chemistry. The act of passing the bowl created an unspoken covenant. Those who drank together became phono, bound by the mutual obligation to uphold whatever decisions emerged. Modern scientists might attribute this to the drink's active compounds lowering inhibitions, but Polynesians understood something deeper. Rituals that engage the senses, taste, touch, even the sound of the kava being pounded, create memories that mere words cannot. Now shift your gaze from these torchlit circles to a ritual where light itself became the binding force. While Polynesians found unity in shared cups, the Zoroastrians of ancient Persia gathered around flames that never died, a different kind of communal hearth where fire wasn't just worshipped, but woven into the very fabric of their identity. In the quiet glow of Zoroastrian fire temples, where flames burned without end, an entire civilization found its moral compass. These weren't ordinary fires, they were living symbols of Ahura Mazda's divine wisdom, fed 5 times a day with sandalwood and frankincense by white-robed priests who chanted ancient Avestan hymns. Imagine the scene, worshippers circling the sacred fire in deliberate steps, their faces warmed by its glow as they whispered prayers for clarity in the eternal battle between light and darkness. The fire's purity wasn't just spiritual, it was physical. No ordinary fuel would do, only the driest wood, carefully selected to avoid smoke that might obscure the flame's brilliance. Even the temple architecture participated in the ritual, with domed ceilings designed to draw heat upward, creating a vortex that mirrored the cosmic struggle between good and evil. The fire's endurance held profound meaning. Unlike the fleeting torches of other traditions, these flames never died, symbolizing society's unbroken vigilance against chaos. Fire temples became more than places of worship. They were civic centers where legal disputes were settled, marriages blessed, and communal decisions made under the flame's impartial gaze. The ritual's genius lay in its duality. The same fire that purified spiritual corruption also forged practical unity. When Parsis fled persecution in Persia, they carried embers from these sacred fires to India, proving that some bonds could outlast even exile. Modern visitors to Yazd's HK still witness this continuity. The same flame, tended for over 1,500 years, flickers behind glass, a testament to rituals that transcend generations. Unlike dramatic sacrifices or ecstatic dances, the power here lay in constancy, a quiet reminder that light, no matter how small, could hold back the dark. Now shift your gaze from these eternal flames to a ritual where fire wasn't merely observed but conquered. The Maasai warriors' coming-of-age ceremony, where boys became men by leaping over burning branches, turning fear into communal triumph. Where Zoroastrians worshipped fire's purity, the Maasai mastered its fury, proving that rituals could transform individuals as powerfully as they bound societies. On a crisp Saturday morning, the hush of the synagogue breaks as a 13-year-old boy rises to face the congregation, his voice trembling slightly as he chants from the ancient Torah scroll for the very first time. This moment, the bar mitzvah, is far more than a recitation. It's a seismic shift in identity, where childhood dissolves into responsibility before the eyes of an entire community. The Hebrew words bar mitzvah literally mean son of the commandment, but the ritual's power lies in its duality. It's both deeply personal and profoundly collective. As the young man's voice grows steadier, echoing off centuries-old stone walls, something remarkable unfolds. The voices of his grandparents, parents, and mentors rise in support, their melodies weaving through his like a living tapestry of tradition. The preparation for this day spans years, hidden in the quiet hours of after-school tutoring where boys master not just Hebrew pronunciation, but the weight of what they're inheriting. Every flourish of the trope, the musical notations guiding the chant, carries generations of interpretation. When the boy finishes his portion, the congregation showers him with candy, a sweet paradox, celebration mingled with the unspoken message that wisdom, like sugar, must be earned in measured doses. The party that follows, often lavish in modern times, traces back to simpler roots, a festive meal where the community literally fed the new adult's emerging role. What makes the bar mitzvah extraordinary isn't just its endurance over 2 millennia, but its adaptability. In some communities, girls celebrate bat mitzvahs with equal reverence. The ritual's core remains unchanged, a child stepping into a chain of responsibility that stretches back to Mount Sinai, yet flexible enough to accommodate every era's needs. It's a masterclass in cultural continuity, proof that rituals survive not by staying frozen, but by growing roots deep enough to weather change. Now, let's turn from this intimate human transformation to a ritual where the earth itself was the guest of honor. Far from the synagogue's candlelight, the Hopi people of the American Southwest performed ceremonies that didn't just acknowledge nature's power, but conversed with it, a dialogue written in corn pollen and the footsteps of dancers who became the rain itself. High in the Andes, where terraced fields clung to steep mountainsides, the women of the Inca Empire performed a ritual that turned saliva into sacrament. The making of chicha wasn't just brewing, it was alchemy, where corn, water, and human effort transformed into the golden elixir that fueled an entire civilization. Picture the scene, rows of women seated together, their mouths working in rhythmic unison as they chewed dried maize, spitting the pulpy mass into clay vats where enzymes in their saliva broke down starches into fermentable sugars. This wasn't mere drudgery, it was a sacred symphony of shared labor, where gossip and laughter mingled with the earthy scent of germinating grain. The genius of chicha lay in its duality. On festival days, when the sun god Inti demanded offerings, the same beer that flowed freely in communal feasts was poured liberally onto the earth as libation. The first sip always went to Pachamama, the Earth Mother, her thirst quenched before any human dared drink. But chicha's power extended beyond the spiritual. It was the grease that turned the wheels of Inca society. Laborers building Machu Picchu's stone marvels received chicha as payment, its caloric value fueling their backbreaking work. Political alliances were sealed not with treaties, but with shared sips from ornate Kiros cups, their intricate designs telling stories of reciprocity and trust. Even the empire's vast road system had chicherias at regular intervals, ensuring no traveler ever lacked this liquid reminder of home. What made this ritual extraordinary wasn't just its scale, entire villages brewing together, but its inversion of ordinary hierarchies. In a society where men dominated warfare and priesthood, chicha was the women's domain. From peasant wives to the koya, the emperor's own sister wife, all participated in this great equalizer. The fermentation vats became crucibles of community, where social barriers dissolved as surely as the corn in their mouths. Modern chemists might marvel at the science amylase enzymes kickstarting fermentation, but the Inca understood something deeper, that rituals woven into daily life endure longest. Now let's trace a different kind of bond, one not forged through shared labor, but through the most intimate of human connections. From the chicha circles of the Andes, we journey to the silk-draped chambers of Heian, Japan, where a marriage ritual turned private devotion into public poetry, proving that love itself could be a communal act. Beneath the vibrant wedding canopy, as sacred fire crackles and fragrant flowers scent the air, the bride and groom take their first synchronized step, not just toward each other, but into an entirely new existence. The Saptapadi, or 7 steps, transforms abstract vows into physical motion, each footfall etching promises into the earth itself. Picture the scene, hands bound by garlands, the couple circles the holy fire clockwise, their draped garments whispering against the ground as priests chant mantras older than the Sanskrit language. With the first step, they pledge nourishment and prosperity, the second vows strength and health, the third promises spiritual growth. But here's what makes this ritual extraordinary: it's not performed in isolation. Dozens of relatives lean forward, their murmurs of approval rising like a living safety net beneath each vow. The 7th step seals something beyond romance. It creates legal kinship under Hindu law. In that moment, 2 families become one economic and spiritual unit, their shared responsibility woven into the ritual's very structure. Modern couples might exchange rings or sign certificates, but the Saptapadi engages the whole body, the pressure of feet against soil, the heat of the fire on skin, the weight of garlands symbolizing interconnected fates. Even the direction holds meaning. Clockwise movement mirrors the sun's path across the sky, aligning human bonds with cosmic order. Now, shift from this sacred circle to the battle-scarred fields of feudal Japan, where warriors demonstrated loyalty through a ritual far more visceral than spoken vows. While Hindu couples walked toward life's blessings, samurai prepared to embrace death with equal solemnity, not in 7 steps, but in a single, flawless motion that would define their legacy. Under the cloak of a moonless night, groups of Spartan youth slipped through the olive groves, their daggers cold against their thighs. This was the Cryptaia, not just a test of skill, but a harrowing rite of passage that transformed boys into bound warriors. Imagine the weight of that silence: no torches, no battle cries, just the rustle of their cloaks and the pounding of their own hearts as they stalked their quarry, the Helots, the enslaved class whose labor sustained Sparta's mighty war machine. The rules were simple yet chilling: kill without detection, vanish before dawn, and prove your loyalty to the state with blood. What made this ritual so potent wasn't just its violence, but its psychological complexity. These weren't random killings, they were calculated acts of terror designed to keep the Helot population submissive while forging unbreakable bonds among the young Spartans. The secrecy surrounding the Cryptaia amplified its power. No one spoke of it openly, yet every Spartan boy knew his turn would come. This shared silence created a brotherhood thicker than blood, a grim understanding that they were now part of something darker and greater than themselves. Historians debate whether the Cryptaia was annual or sporadic, but its impact was undeniable. It distilled Sparta's most brutal values into a single, visceral experience. Surviving it meant more than earning your place in the mess hall. It meant internalizing the stark truth that the state's survival demanded absolute sacrifice. Yet the Cryptaia's legacy is fraught with contradictions. While it produced some of history's most feared warriors, it also exposed the fragility of societies built on oppression. The very Helots they hunted were the backbone of Sparta's economy, their backs bent in the fields, their hands shaping the weapons these youths would later wield. The ritual's brilliance lay in its perverse alchemy. It turned fear of rebellion into a tool of unity, transforming the oppressed into both enemy and essential partner. Modern special forces training echoes shades of this ethos. Think of Navy SEAL Hell Week, where exhaustion and shared suffering forge unshakable loyalty. But the Cryptaia took it to an extreme that still chills the blood. Now shift your gaze from these shadowed groves to a ritual where darkness gave way to light. Far from Sparta's brutal secrecy, the ancient Egyptians celebrated rebirth in a blaze of torchlight and song, proving that unity could be forged not through fear, but through the joyous certainty of renewal. In the hushed glow of candlelight, as water cascades over an infant's forehead or an adult kneels waist-deep in a river, something extraordinary unfolds, a moment where the ordinary becomes sacred. Christian baptism isn't just a splash of water. It's a ritual that stitches individual souls into a tapestry of faith spanning continents and centuries. Picture the scene: a medieval cathedral's font carved from stone, a muddy riverbank in the Amazon, or a makeshift tub in an underground church, each setting different, yet all united by the same elemental act. The water that drips from the priest's fingers or the pastor's cupped hands carries echoes of ancient purification rites. The Jewish mikveh, the Nile's sacred floods, even the pagan wells where pilgrims once sought healing. But here's the twist: baptism doesn't just cleanse, it initiates. That moment of immersion or sprinkling marks a birth into a new family, one where a grandmother in Nairobi and a teenager in Seoul can call each other brother and sister despite never meeting. The ritual's power lies in its simplicity and depth. A child's baptism, with its white gown and flickering candle, mirrors the adult's full body plunge, both proclaiming the same truth: death to the old self, resurrection to the new. Early Christians risked persecution to perform this rite in secret catacombs, while today's megachurches baptize thousands in glass-walled pools. Yet whether performed with elaborate chrism oils or the bare hands of a missionary, the core remains unchanged. This adaptability is baptism's genius. In the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, the faithful dance around the font in jubilation. In a quiet Lutheran chapel, the rite unfolds with solemn hymns. The water itself becomes a universal language, transcending doctrinal differences to whisper the same promise of renewal. Now, turn your gaze from these living waters to the silent embrace of the earth, where an entirely different ritual honored not the living, but the ancestors who walked before. While baptism celebrated new beginnings, Japan's Bon Festival wove the departed back into the fabric of daily life, proving that rituals could bridge not just geography, but time itself. At a polished wooden table set with porcelain bowls and ancestral portraits, a Korean family bows deeply, not to empty chairs, but to the unseen presence of generations past. The Jessa ceremony transforms grief into an act of communion, where the dead are neither gone nor forgotten, but seated at the very heart of daily life. Picture the precision of this ritual. Daughters-in-law simmer beef ribs for hours until the meat falls from the bone, while grandchildren arrange persimmons and chestnuts in perfect pyramids, each fruit's placement dictated by centuries of tradition. The table itself becomes a sacred map: fish face east, rice and soup sit to the west, and chopsticks stand upright in bowls like bridges between worlds. This isn't mere remembrance, it's an invitation. What makes Jessa extraordinary is its tactile intimacy. Unlike distant memorials or silent graveyard visits, here ancestors are treated as honored guests. The eldest son pours soju into a tiny cup, filling it precisely 3 times while reciting news of the family, births, promotions, even mundane triumphs like a child's good grades. The ritual's genius lies in its contradictions. It's both solemn and lively, formal yet deeply personal. After the ceremonial bows and offerings, the family gathers to eat the same food, blurring the line between the living and the dead. Modern variations have adapted. Some families now include photographs of lost pets or simplified meals for busy households, but the core remains unchanged. Death doesn't sever bonds, it redefines them. Archaeologists have found Jessa-like vessels in ancient Silla kingdom tombs, proving this ritual's roots stretch back over a millennium, but its true power lies in how it shapes the living. Children learn genealogy through these meals, touching the same spoon that once fed their great-grandmother. Grief becomes cyclical rather than linear, with ancestors returning not as ghosts but as participants in an unbroken chain of care. When the final bowl is cleared and the portraits carefully wrapped, what lingers isn't sorrow, but the quiet certainty that no one truly leaves. Now, turn your gaze from these candlelit tables to a ritual where light needed no invitation, it blazed from the heavens itself. While Korean families honored their ancestors through shared meals, the Inti Raymi festival of the Inca Empire celebrated the sun's return with a spectacle so radiant, its echoes still illuminate the Andes every winter solstice. As the shortest day of the year cast long shadows across Cusco's sacred plaza, the Sapa Inca raised his golden cup toward the horizon, his voice cutting through the dawn stillness. The entire empire held its breath. Would Inti, the sun god, accept their pleas and turn his face back toward the earth? This was Inti Raymi, the festival of the sun, where cosmology and statecraft merged in a spectacle designed to awe. Picture the scene, thousands gathered on the terraced hillsides, their colorful tunics creating a living mosaic against the stone temples, while priests in jaguar pelts chanted hymns older than memory. At the precise moment the solstice sun touched the horizon, the Sapa Inca would pour chicha into a golden basin, the liquid shimmering surface becoming a mirror for the cosmos itself. If the light struck at just the right angle, illuminating the sacred drink, the crowd erupted. The gods had granted another cycle of life, but Inti Raymi's brilliance lay beyond its celestial drama. Every element reinforced imperial unity. Dancers from conquered territories performed in their traditional garb, their movements woven into the ritual's fabric, a visual reminder that diversity strengthened the empire. The sacrificial llamas, their pure white fleece symbolizing the sun's radiance, weren't merely offerings. Their carefully distributed meat fed the multitudes, turning spiritual act into communal feast. Even the architecture participated. The Coricancha temple's trapezoidal windows aligned perfectly with the solstice sunrise, transforming stone and sunlight into a celestial clock. This wasn't just pageantry, it was political theater on a divine scale. By positioning himself as the sole conduit between Inti and humanity, the Sapa Inca cemented his godlike authority while binding distant provinces to Cusco's heart. Modern recreations in Peru still capture fragments of this grandeur, but the original ritual's genius was its multifaceted purpose. It synchronized agricultural cycles across the Andes microclimates, ensured tribute flowed to the capital, and through shared awe, made imperial rule feel inevitable. When the Spanish banned Inti Raymi in the 16th century, they understood its power. Rituals that fuse cosmic order with earthly governance don't just reflect power, they create it. Now, shift your gaze from these sun-drenched plazas to the misty riverbanks of India, where an entirely different kind of purification unfolded, one that cleansed not through imperial spectacle, but through intimate immersion. While Inti Raymi united an empire under the sun's gaze, the Hindu ritual of Ganga Aharani offered individuals a chance to dissolve their burdens in sacred waters, proving that renewal could be as personal as it was profound. In the quiet moments before dawn, when the first call to prayer echoes across minarets from Jakarta to Johannesburg, millions of Muslims begin their day not with coffee or breakfast, but with water. The ritual of wudu transforms an ordinary bathroom sink into a sacred space, where the simple act of washing becomes a bridge between the earthly and the divine. Picture the precision of this ancient practice, cupped hands catching cool water 3 times, each rinse carrying away distractions along with physical impurities. The face follows, then the arms up to the elbows, a symbolic shedding of worldly concerns. Then the head, wiped with damp fingers, and finally the feet, each step methodical, each motion infused with intention. This isn't hygiene, it's hydrotherapy for the soul. What makes Wudu extraordinary isn't just its spiritual significance, but its unifying power. A banker in Dubai and a farmer in Mali perform the same motions with the same reverence, their hands moving in synchronized rhythm despite oceans of difference between their daily lives. The ritual's uniformity creates an invisible thread stitching together the global Muslim community, one that doesn't fray with distance or time. Even the water itself becomes sacred. In desert regions where wells are scarce, the faithful may use clean sand instead, a practice known as tayammum, proving the ritual adapts without losing its essence. But Wudu's brilliance lies in its duality. While the outer cleansing is visible, droplets glistening on skin, the inner transformation remains intimate. As water trickles between fingers, so too does the mind release grudges, anxieties, and petty concerns, leaving the worshipper spiritually light enough to stand before Allah. Medieval Islamic scholars likened it to polishing a mirror. Only when the surface is clear can divine light reflect without distortion. Modern neuroscience might call it a grounding technique, but Muslims have known for 14 centuries that physical rituals can recalibrate the mind. Now shift your gaze from these quiet moments of preparation to a ritual where water gave way to words, not in silent reflection, but in exuberant celebration. While Wudu prepared individuals for connection with the divine, the griots of West Africa wove entire communities together through the living tapestry of oral storytelling, proving that shared narratives could bind generations as surely as shared rituals. Beneath the sprawling baobab trees of West Africa, where firelight danced against eager faces, a single voice could summon kings long dead and battles fought centuries ago. The griot wasn't just a storyteller, they were the living heartbeat of a people, their words weaving genealogies and moral lessons into melodies that clung to memory like honey. Picture the scene, a village gathering at dusk, children pressed close as the griot's kora hummed to life, its 21 strings vibrating with the weight of generations. With each pluck, history unfurled not as dry facts, but as epic dramas where ancestors laughed, loved, and erred, their triumphs and follies becoming mirrors for the living. A skilled griot could make the past so vivid you'd smell the sweat on Sundiata Keita's brow as he founded the Mali Empire, or feel the sting of Queen Amina's sword as she defended Zazao. This tradition's brilliance lay in its fluid precision. Griots didn't merely recite, they performed, adapting their delivery to the crowd's energy. A marriage might call for humorous tales of ill-fated suitors, while a coronation demanded solemn recitations of royal lineage. Their verses served as moral compasses, encoding societal values in memorable refrains. When a griot sang of the greedy king who lost his throne to ants, everyone grasped the warning about arrogance. Their role as truth keepers gave them unparalleled influence. A griot's praise could immortalize a leader, while their satire could topple one. Manned oral histories, passed down verbatim through rigorous apprenticeship, achieved astonishing accuracy. Modern scholars have found correlations between griot narratives and 14th century Arabic manuscripts. Yet griots were more than human archives. Their very presence at births, weddings, and funerals wove individual lives into the communal tapestry. A child's name might be chosen from a griot's tale, linking them to ancestral virtues. Disputes were settled not in courts but through griot-mediated dialogues where proverbs carried the weight of legal precedent. Even their instruments held meaning. The kora's calabash bass represented the womb of society, its strings the interconnected strands of fate. In a world without paper, griots turned air and memory into indestructible libraries. Now, let's witness a ritual where reverence flowed not toward human chroniclers, but toward the creatures who shared the land. From the griot's lyrical homage to history, we journey to the Arctic, where the Inuit honored the seals that sustained them not as resources to exploit, but as conscious partners in a sacred covenant of survival. In the mist-shrouded forests of Hokkaido, where ancient cedar trees whispered secrets to the wind, the Ainu people performed a ritual that blurred the line between the sacred and the mundane. The Ayamonte, or Bear Festival, wasn't simply a ceremony. It was a year-long conversation between humans and gods, where a wild cub became both honored guest and divine messenger. Picture this: hunters returning from the mountains with a tiny bear cub, its fate already woven into the fabric of Ainu spirituality. The cub would be raised by the village women, nursed alongside human infants, even given sips of ceremonial sake from carved wooden cups. For months or years, it lived as family, its growls and playful swats greeted with laughter and reverence. But every detail, the special cage built from sacred wood, the intricate patterns shaved into its fur, hinted at a deeper purpose. This bear wasn't just an animal, it was Kamai, a visiting deity in mortal form. When the festival dawned, the entire village transformed into a living altar. Men carved intricate Ino prayer sticks from willow branches, their curled shavings representing the gods' beards. Women prepared mountains of millet dumplings and fermented salmon, while children practiced ritual dances mimicking cranes and foxes. The bear, now grown strong, would be led through the village one last time, adorned with jewelry and colorful cords. Then came the moment that still puzzles outsiders: the killing. Arrows flew not in violence, but in solemn precision, ensuring the bear's spirit could return unblemished to the mountain kami. As the life left its body, the Ainu wept, not in guilt but in gratitude, their tears mingling with ceremonial wine poured into the dead bear's mouth. What makes Ayamonte extraordinary isn't just its emotional complexity, but its ecological wisdom. Every part of the bear was used, meat shared in a feast that bonded the living, bones buried with offerings to ensure rebirth, skull placed atop a sacred pole where its spirit could watch over the village. The ritual wasn't about taking life, but participating in a cycle older than memory. Modern biologists might call this sustainable hunting. The Ainu knew it as reciprocal survival. Their chants echoed this truth: return to the gods and tell them how well we treated you. Bring back your kin so we may honor them too. This ritual's legacy lingers in surprising ways. Contemporary Ainu activists revive Ayamonte not with real bears now protected by law, but with symbolic effigies keeping the philosophy alive. The festival's essence teaches something universal, that reverence and necessity need not be opposites. When the last dumpling was eaten and the final prayer stick burned, the Ainu didn't mourn. They celebrated, knowing the bear's spirit would carry their gratitude into the celestial realms, weaving human lives into nature's endless rhythm. Now turn your gaze southward to the emerald rice paddies of Bali, where an entirely different ritual marked time's passage, not through sacrifice but through silence. While the Ainu honored the bear's journey between worlds, the Balinese Nyepi Festival stopped the island's heartbeat for 24 hours, proving that sometimes the most powerful bonds are forged in shared stillness. High in the mist-shrouded temples of the Maya world, where the jungle canopy stretched endlessly toward the heavens, priests prepared for a ritual that would bridge the divide between earth and sky. The rain ceremonies honoring Chok weren't mere supplications. They were acts of sacred reciprocity, where human suffering became the currency for cosmic balance. Picture the scene: a priest standing atop a pyramid, his body adorned with jade beads symbolizing raindrops, as he drew a stingray spine across his tongue or genitals, letting crimson droplets fall onto bark paper below. The pain was intentional, a visceral offering to the hook-nosed deity who controlled the storms. But this wasn't solitary suffering. The entire community participated. Farmers brought ears of corn painted blue, the color of precious water, while women wove intricate textiles depicting Chok's watery domain. Even children contributed, their laughter silenced as they watched the blood-spattered paper burn in ceremonial urns, its smoke curling upward like storm clouds summoned by divine command. The precision of these rituals was as calculated as the movements of the stars themselves. Maya astronomers tracked Venus's cycles and the solstices with razor-sharp accuracy, timing the ceremonies to celestial events that signaled the onset of the rainy season. Temple alignments at sites like Chichen Itza transformed stone into astronomical instruments during equinoxes. Shadows slithered down the pyramid steps like serpents, signaling the moment to begin the rites. But the true genius lay in the ritual's dual nature. While the bloodletting appeased Chok, the communal feasts that followed, where the entire village shared tamales steamed in banana leaves, reinforced social bonds. The maize used wasn't just food, it was the god's own flesh, a reminder that survival depended on this sacred exchange. Modern excavations have uncovered ceremonial caches filled with jadate axes, their blades shaped like storm clouds, buried precisely where the rituals dictated proof that these weren't symbolic gestures, but acts of profound consequence. Now shift your gaze from these life-giving storms to a ritual where water held an entirely different meaning, not as sustenance, but as a passage to the afterlife. While the Maya sought to harness nature's rhythms, the ancient Egyptians performed ceremonies that turned death itself into an art form, proving that rituals could transform humanity's greatest fear into a journey of transcendent beauty. In the hushed depths of an Egyptian tomb, where torchlight flickered against hieroglyph-covered walls, a priest raised a slender adze not to build, but to resurrect. The opening of the mouth ceremony transformed stillness into eternal life through meticulous choreography. Picture the solemn procession, lector priests chanting from scrolls, embalmers bearing jars of sacred oils, and the grieving family watching as a golden blade hovered above their loved one's mummified lips. With precise strokes, the priest touched the adze to the mouth, then the eyes and ears, each motion accompanied by spells older than the pyramids themselves. This wasn't symbolic theater, it was functional magic. Ancient Egyptians believed the soul needed physical faculties in the afterlife, to devour offerings of bread and beer, to recite spells against demons, to testify before Osiris in the Hall of Judgment. The tools used held profound significance. The adze mirrored the constellation Ursa Major, linking the ritual to celestial cycles. A forked Peshesh-Kef knife, its shape echoing the hieroglyph for to divide, symbolically separated the deceased from earthly limitations. Even the order of operations followed cosmic logic, north side first, then south, mirroring the sun's journey. But here's what made this ritual genius: it served dual audiences. While preparing the dead for paradise, it gave the living tangible steps to channel grief. By anointing the mummy's senses back to functionality, mourners could imagine their grandmother tasting dates in the field of reeds or their child laughing again in the company of gods. Archaeologists have found miniature mouth-opening sets buried with commoners, proving even those who couldn't afford elaborate tombs sought this transformative rite. The ceremony's legacy lingers in unexpected places. Modern surgeons still call their first incision the sacred cut, an unconscious echo of those ancient priests who turned ritual into resurrection. Now shift your gaze from these funerary rites to a celebration where life's vibrancy took center stage. Far from silent tombs, the craftsmen of medieval Europe honored their patron saint with guild processions so lavish, they turned city streets into living cathedrals of skill and solidarity. In the flickering candlelight of a medieval guild hall, a young apprentice knelt before masters whose hands bore the calluses of decades at the loom. The air smelled of beeswax and freshly planed oak as the initiate placed his palm upon a leather-bound guild charter, its parchment worn smooth by generations of oaths. This wasn't merely a job interview, it was a transformation, where boys became craftsmen through rituals as precise as the joinery they'd spend their lives perfecting. The initiation ceremonies of medieval guilds wove together the sacred and the mundane, turning everyday trades like weaving, blacksmithing, and stonemasonry into callings worthy of solemn vows. Consider the layers of meaning in a master mason's initiation. The candidate might be blindfolded and led through a labyrinth of symbolic tools, a square representing virtue, a compass for precision, a mallet for discipline. Each object carried dual significance, practical for the craft, mystical for the fraternity. When the blindfold finally dropped, the initiate would find himself before a tracing floor where masterpieces were planned in chalk, and be handed his first personal marker, a unique signature carved into every stone he'd ever shape. This mark wasn't just identification, it bound him to a lineage stretching back to the builders of cathedrals. Guilds guarded these rites fiercely, punishing oath breakers with fines or expulsion, because they understood something profound. Craftsmanship without ethics was just labor, but labor infused with ritual became legacy. The ceremonies varied wildly by trade yet shared a common thread. Vintners in Bordeaux anointed new members with wine instead of water, whispering secrets of terroir passed down since Roman times. Goldsmiths in Florence tested initiates by having them distinguish pure metal from alloy, using only their teeth, a literal bite into the truth. But the most elaborate rituals belonged to the Masons, whose lodges eventually birthed modern Freemasonry. Their charges manuscripts, some dating to the 1400s, describe ceremonies where candidates reenacted the building of Solomon's temple, their tools becoming metaphors for moral living, the chisel shaping rough stone into virtue, the level reminding all men walk equally before God. What made these rituals endure wasn't their secrecy, but their transformative power. A guild initiation didn't just teach skills, it rewired identity. When a young man swore his oath on the guild's relic, perhaps a splinter from the true cross for carpenters or St. Eligius's anvil for smiths, he wasn't just joining a trade association. He was entering a sacred brotherhood that would bury him with honor, care for his widow, and etch his name in the guild's ledger long after his tools went quiet. The proof lies in the ledgers themselves, where generations of masters recorded not just sales, but births, deaths, and even disputes settled over ale in the guild hall, a tapestry of lives interlaced by craft and ceremony. Now, let's raise a glass to a ritual where the sacred met the spirited, the bacchanalian mysteries of ancient Greece, where wine wasn't just a drink but a doorway to the divine. While guilds bonded through solemn oaths, the followers of Dionysus found unity in ecstatic release, proving that rituals could intoxicate the soul as surely as they structured society. Under the cloak of night, in groves where ivy twisted around ancient oaks, the air itself seemed to pulse with something primal. The Dionysian mysteries weren't just rituals, they were revolutions in motion, where wine flowed like liquid courage and the boundaries between mortal and divine melted away. Imagine the scene, women clad in fawn skins, their hair wild with vine leaves, moving in frenzied circles to the relentless beat of drums. Men who spent their days bound by the rigid roles of Greek society, citizen or slave, noble or farmer, now danced side by side, their voices rising in ecstatic cries of "Euoi." As if the god himself had untethered their souls, this wasn't mere revelry, it was a sacred unraveling, a temporary dissolution of every constraint that kept humanity small. At the heart of these mysteries lay a paradox: chaos as a path to enlightenment. Participants drank not just to intoxicate, but to awaken, to glimpse the raw, unfiltered truth beneath civilization's veneer. The wine they gulped from ceremonial craters symbolized Dionysus's own blood, a reminder that life and death were intertwined, but the real alchemy happened in the dance. As bodies swayed and pulsed in unison, the rhythmic stomping of feet blurred into a single heartbeat, erasing individuality until only collective ecstasy remained. Historical accounts describe Maenads, the gods' female devotees, allegedly gaining supernatural strength, tearing animals apart with bare hands in a symbolic rending of societal norms. Whether literal or metaphorical, these acts revealed a startling truth. Sometimes order could only be reaffirmed by first surrendering to madness. The genius of the Dionysian rites lay in their controlled wildness. Unlike the rigid protocols of Athena's temples or Apollo's oracles, these celebrations thrived on spontaneity, yet they weren't lawless. Ritual masks, often grotesque or exaggerated, allowed participants to shed their identities without abandoning purpose. The thesis, a fennel staff crowned with a pine cone, served as both sacred scepter and weapon against repression. Even the locations were deliberate, held in wilderness spaces beyond city walls, where the natural world could amplify the sense of boundary breaking. For a brief, shimmering moment, hierarchy inverted. Slaves commanded masters, women led men. The marginalized found their voices amplified by divine frenzy. But why did Greek society, so obsessed with balance and reason, tolerate such volatility? Because the mysteries served a vital function. They were pressure valves for collective tension. Like a forest fire clearing undergrowth to nourish new growth, these rites purified through catharsis. By channeling chaos into sacred space, the polis prevented it from erupting in destructive ways. Modern parallels abound. Think of Carnival in Rio or Mardi Gras in New Orleans, where sanctioned abandon reinforces social cohesion. The Dionysian cult's legacy whispers an enduring lesson. Civilizations that deny chaos risk fracturing under its weight, while those that ritualize it often emerge stronger. Now, let's turn from the vine-clad chaos of Dionysus to a ritual where silence spoke louder than ecstasy, and the tools of creation were as sacred as the gods themselves. From the intoxication of wine, we journey to the intoxication of words, the ancient Egyptian ritual of the scribes, where ink and papyrus became bridges to eternity. In the pre-dawn darkness of imperial Beijing, the air thick with incense and nervous anticipation, thousands of scholars gathered at the gates of the examination compound, not just to test their knowledge, but to undergo a transformation. The Chinese imperial examinations weren't merely tests. They were elaborate rituals that turned learning into sacred currency and passing candidates into living bridges between heaven and earthly governance. Picture these men, some barely 20, others gray-haired after decades of attempts, submitting to purification rites before entering the labyrinthine testing halls. They bathed in water infused with cypress leaves to ward off evil influences, donned plain cotton robes to symbolize intellectual purity, and passed through gates guarded by officials who inspected their ink stones for hidden cheat sheets as meticulously as priests checking sacrificial offerings. The 3-day exams themselves unfolded with monastic severity. Locked in tiny wooden cubicles barely larger than coffins, candidates composed 8-legged essays on Confucian philosophy, while servants delivered meals through slots. No speaking, no glancing sideways, just the endless scratch of brushes on paper under the watchful eyes of examiners patrolling like stern deities. But the real alchemy occurred after the results were posted. Those who passed didn't simply receive diplomas, they were reborn through ceremonies worthy of coronations. The top graduates, the Jinshi, processed through the streets on horseback, their robes embroidered with Mandarin squares denoting rank, while crowds showered them with flowers and lucky red paper cuttings. At the temple of Confucius, they kowtowed before the sage tablet, their foreheads touching the same stone where emperors once paid homage. What made this ritual extraordinary was its dual power. It sanctified meritocracy while forging cultural unity across a vast empire. A peasant's son from Guangdong and a merchant's grandson from Shaanxi might interpret the Analects differently, but their shared mastery of its verses and the identical rituals they endured to prove it created an intellectual lingua franca that bound China together for centuries. Even the exam's physical artifacts became sacred objects. The brush of destiny some candidates worshipped, the vermilion ink reserved solely for grading that turned human judgment into something quasi-divine. This wasn't just bureaucracy, it was alchemy, turning ink and paper into social mobility and regional differences into imperial cohesion. Now, let's leave these ink-stained halls for a ritual where knowledge wasn't written, it was forged in flame. From the quiet intensity of scholars memorizing classics, we journey to the roaring fires of Japan's Tatara steel furnaces, where swordsmiths performed Shinto ceremonies as they folded molten metal into blades so legendary they were believed to hold the very soul of the warrior. As twilight descends on the last Wednesday before spring, the streets of Iran erupt in a primal spectacle of flickering gold and laughter. Chahar-Shand Suri transforms neighborhoods into rivers of fire, where families and strangers alike gather around bonfires built not for warmth but for transcendence. Imagine the crackle of dried shrubs, the scent of burning and seeds purifying the air, and the daring silhouettes of children and elders alike leaping over flames shouting, "Give me your beautiful red hue, take back my sickly pallor." This isn't reckless play, it's a sacred exchange with the fire itself, a ritual as old as Persia's Zoroastrian roots, where light wasn't just admired but worshipped as a divine force capable of scouring away misfortune. The brilliance of this ritual lies in its layered symbolism. Fire, in Zoroastrian tradition, represents Ahura Mazda's wisdom, the ultimate purifier that separates truth from deception. By jumping, participants don't just confront their fears, they physically enact rebirth, shedding the years' accumulated darkness like a snake sloughing its skin. The chants aren't mere rhymes but incantations, channeling collective hope into the flames. Even the ingredients matter. Wild rue seeds tossed into fires pop like tiny exorcisms, their sharp aroma believed to repel the evil eye. What modern onlookers might mistake for a festive bonfire party is actually a meticulously choreographed dialogue between humanity and the elements. Yet Chahar-Shand Suri's power extends beyond the spiritual. The ritual's communal nature, wealthy and poor sharing the same fires, urbanites and villagers singing identical folk songs, forges unity across social divides. Unlike private prayers whispered in solitude, these flames demand public participation, turning individual purification into a shared triumph. Historians trace the festival's resilience through empires and invasions. Even when Islam replaced Zoroastrianism as Persia's dominant faith, the people clung to this fiery rite, adapting it with Quranic verses while preserving its essence. Such endurance speaks to a universal truth. Humans will always crave rituals that literalize renewal, where we can see our worries burn and feel lighter on the other side. Now let's step from this cacophony of crackling flames into a ritual where reverence took the opposite form, not in leaping and shouting, but in hushed, collective silence. Far from the bonfire's glow, the Balinese Nyapi festival proves that sometimes the deepest bonds are forged not through action, but through the sacred act of stillness. In the hushed stillness of a Vipassana meditation hall, where even the rustle of robes sounds thunderous, hundreds sit motionless, not in isolation, but in profound connection. The Buddhist Vipassana retreat strips away speech, eye contact, even gestures, reducing human interaction to shared breaths and the occasional chime of a bell. Yet this silence isn't empty. It vibrates with an unspoken understanding deeper than words could convey. Imagine 10 days without speaking, your only companion the relentless observation of your own breath, the itch on your nose you're trained not to scratch, the growling stomach you must acknowledge without reacting. At first, it feels like solitary confinement. Then, something shifts. The absence of chatter sharpens other senses, the warmth of sunlight through a window, the collective sigh when the meditation gong finally rings, the way a stranger's stillness across the room becomes a silent anchor for your own focus. The ritual's genius lies in its paradoxical design. By forbidding external connection, it forges internal ones. Participants describe sensing the room's energy like a living entity. When one person struggles with restlessness, others unconsciously sit straighter, their shared discipline becoming a scaffold for perseverance. Meals taken in silence become acts of communion. Chewing mindfully, you notice the labor behind each grain of rice, the farmers and cooks who made this moment possible. Even the walking meditation, where bare feet touch earth in synchronized slowness, transforms into a wordless dance of mutual respect. This tradition traces back to ancient India, where monks gathered for rains retreats during monsoons, but its modern incarnation owes much to S. N. Gonka, a Burmese Indian teacher who democratized Vipassana in the 20th century. His recordings still guide retreats worldwide, their cadence as familiar to practitioners as a grandfather's voice. The retreat's rigid schedule, 4 a.m. wake-up calls, 10 hours of daily meditation, isn't arbitrary. It's a spiritual pressure cooker, deliberately stripping away distractions so participants confront their mind's chaos. By day 7, even seasoned meditators hit walls, memories surge, emotions boil over, yet the rule remains: observe, don't react. This shared ordeal creates bonds stronger than team-building exercises. It's like surviving a storm in the same lifeboat, where silent glances convey volumes. What makes Vipassana extraordinary isn't just the discipline, but the revelation that follows. On the final morning, when noble silence lifts, the first hesitant words between retreatants often echo each other: "You too." Strangers discover they battled identical doubts, experienced parallel breakthroughs. The ritual's power lies in this duality. It's deeply personal yet universally resonant, isolating yet unifying. Modern neuroscience confirms what ancient practitioners knew: synchronized activities, even quiet ones, release oxytocin and synchronize brain waves. But Vipassana adds a spiritual dimension, the understanding that inner peace isn't solitary. It's a collective achievement, built one silent breath at a time. Now, let's shift from this wordless communion to a ritual where masks didn't conceal identity, but revealed deeper truths. While Vipassana seekers found connection through stillness, the Venetian carnival celebrated transformation through flamboyant disguise, proving that sometimes the most authentic bonds are forged when we dare to pretend. Beneath the flickering torchlight of Venice's canals, where the winter air carried whispers of intrigue and laughter, an entire society stepped into the shadows only to emerge more vividly themselves. The Venetian carnival wasn't just a festival, it was a masterclass in social alchemy, where silk masks and elaborate costumes became tools for dismantling the rigid hierarchies that governed daily life. Imagine the scene: a noblewoman in a black bota mask, her identity hidden behind a stark white beak, trading bawdy jokes with a gondolier whose feathered mortar concealed his sun-weathered face. In the dim glow of Piazza San Marco, neither birth nor wealth mattered, only the shared thrill of anonymity. For weeks leading up to Lent, the city transformed into a living theater where the stage was the streets, and every citizen, from doge to dockworker, became both actor and audience. The masks themselves held profound symbolism. The volto, a simple white face covering, erased individuality so completely that wearers reported feeling both liberated and unnerved, like ghosts among the living. The noga, a feline disguise often paired with exaggerated feminine gestures, allowed men to parody gender norms with impunity. Even the act of masking was ritualized. Masks could only be worn between certain dates, their removal at midnight on Shrove Tuesday, marked by the solemn tolling of church bells. This wasn't chaos, it was controlled chaos, a pressure valve for a republic where social mobility was otherwise frozen. Historians recount tales of impoverished artists who, disguised as foreign dignitaries, gained access to palace banquets, their true identities revealed only when they toasted their hosts with flawless Latin. But Carnival's true brilliance lay in its paradoxes. By hiding their faces, Venetians revealed hidden truths, affairs confessed under cover of a Colombina mask, political grievances whispered through the slits of a medico della peste. The ritual's power came from its temporariness. Like a sandcastle built at high tide, its beauty lay in its inevitable dissolution. When the masks came off, the baker returned to his oven and the senator to his palazzo, but something lingered. A memory of equality that subtly softened the edges of hierarchy. Modern psychologists might call this perspective-taking, but 16th century Venetians understood it more poetically. Siamo tutti uguali quando la luna si specchia nei canali. We are all equal when the moon reflects in the canals. Now, let's cross from these moonlit masquerades to a ritual where boundaries weren't blurred but sanctified. While Carnival celebrated the dissolution of identity, the Roman Liminalia ceremony honored the thresholds between worlds, those fragile, potent spaces where doorways became altars, and every step forward required a backward glance. In the heart of ancient Rome, where cobbled streets hummed with the footsteps of merchants and soldiers alike, stood unassuming doorways that held extraordinary power, not just as passages between rooms, but as sacred thresholds between worlds. The rituals honoring Janus, the two-faced god of beginnings and transitions, turned everyday moments into cosmic events. Picture a Roman bride pausing on her new home's threshold, her fingers brushing a carved image of Janus as she whispered prayers for a marriage that would honor both past and future. Or a general leading his troops through the monumental arch of Janus Geminis, its twin portals symbolizing the duality of war and peace, departure and return. Even the simplest act, a merchant stepping into his shop at dawn, could become ritual when accompanied by a handful of salted flour offered to the god's household shrine. Janus's power lay in his paradoxical nature. His famous double-faced statue wasn't just artistic flair, it embodied the Roman understanding that every ending carries the seed of a beginning. When consuls took office each January, the month named for Janus, they sacrificed a white bull at his temple, its horns gilded to reflect the year's first sunlight. The temple doors, kept open during war and shut in peace, weren't mere symbols. Romans believed Janus himself stood guard there, his dual gaze monitoring comings and goings on both mortal and divine planes. This ritual genius extended to everyday life. Keys placed in Janus's shrines sought his blessing for safe travels, while newborns were carried over thresholds to introduce them to the god's protection. Even Rome's legendary foundation myth tied back to Janus. The Sabine women supposedly stopped a battle by rushing into the fray, their bodies becoming living thresholds between warring factions. What made these rituals extraordinary was their fluidity. Unlike rigid ceremonies requiring priests or temples, Janus worship happened everywhere, from grand state functions to a farmer whispering over his plow before the first furrow. The god's presence turned bridges into sacred spaces, hence the term pontiff, from pons meaning bridge, and crossroads into sites of decision-making. Modern parallels abound. Think of knocking on wood for luck or pausing before entering a new building. But the Romans elevated threshold moments into a sophisticated spiritual practice. Their genius lay in recognizing that transitions aren't just intervals between stable states, they're the hinges on which fate swings. Now, let's step from these silent doorways into a world where sound itself became sacred, where the rhythmic pounding of drums and the shimmering clash of cymbals didn't just accompany rituals, but were the ritual. From the contemplative gaze of Janus, we journey to the ecstatic percussion of the Corybantes, whose frenzied dances shook the earth and opened doors to the divine. High in the Himalayan monasteries, where thin air carries sound with crystalline clarity, a single strike of a mallet sends vibrations rippling through silence, not as noise, but as a doorway to the invisible. Tibetan singing bowl ceremonies transform metal and motion into something far greater, a collective journey inward. Picture the scene: monks seated in concentric circles, their bowls cradled in open palms, each one humming at a slightly different pitch. As the resonances intertwine, they create a living tapestry of harmonics, pulsing through the room like a heartbeat. The bowls themselves are no ordinary vessels. Forged from 7 sacred metals, gold for the sun, silver for the moon, copper for Venus, their alloys are tuned to mirror the frequencies believed to structure the cosmos. When struck, they don't just produce sound, they embody Anahata Nada, the primordial vibration ancient texts describe as the universe's first whisper. What makes this ritual extraordinary isn't just the acoustics, but the physiology it harnesses. As participants synchronize their breathing to the bowl's decay, something remarkable happens. Heart rates begin to align, brain waves shift toward theta states, and individual awareness blurs into a shared trance. Modern studies confirm what monks have known for centuries. These frequencies lower cortisol levels while enhancing gamma wave activity, the neural signature of heightened focus and compassion. The ceremony's genius lies in its simplicity. No dogma is preached, no complex mantras required, just the act of listening together, allowing sound to dissolve the illusion of separation. Even the bowl's shape holds meaning. Its curved base represents the vessel of the mind, while the open top symbolizes limitless awareness. Now, shift your gaze from these harmonic vibrations to a ritual where silence wasn't broken, but interpreted. While Tibetan monks used sound to unite conscious minds, the Ojibwe people of North America turned to the unconscious, believing dreams weren't private experiences but communal wisdom waiting to be decoded. In the smoky glow of the longhouse, where firelight danced across faces lined with wisdom and curiosity, an Iroquois elder would lean forward and ask a simple yet profound question: "What did you dream last night?" This wasn't casual morning chatter, it was sacred dialogue, a ritual where the private landscapes of sleep became public maps for the tribe's survival. Imagine the scene: warriors, mothers, and children alike sharing visions that flickered between prophecy and memory. Their words weighed not as fantasies but as vital intelligence. A hunter's dream of a wounded bear might prompt the clan to postpone a journey. A child's vision of flying over cornfields could inspire the planting of a new crop. The Iroquois understood something modern psychology is only beginning to grasp: that dreams aren't just personal puzzles, but threads in a larger tapestry of collective intuition. What made this practice extraordinary was its structured spontaneity. Dreams weren't blurted out haphazardly. They were recounted in ceremonial circles, often after purification rites involving tobacco smoke or herbal baths. The community would then dissect the symbols together, like elders poring over battle plans. A recurring dream of flooding might spark discussions about relocating the village, while visions of conflict with animal spirits could lead to adjustments in hunting practices. This wasn't superstition, it was sophisticated social technology. By treating dreams as communal property, the Iroquois transformed individual subconscious whispers into a chorus of guidance. Even the act of interpretation followed ritual patterns. Metaphors were unpacked through the lens of clan stories, ancestral teachings, and observations of the natural world. A dream about a fractured arrow might connect to an old legend about unity, prompting leaders to address hidden tensions within the tribe. The genius of dream sharing lay in its duality. While modern therapists analyze dreams to heal individuals, the Iroquois used them to heal the social fabric. A person plagued by nightmares wasn't just soothed privately. Their distress became the community's responsibility to decode and address. Historians note how this practice often prevented conflicts. When two factions dreamed of clashing storms, mediators would convene to reconcile differences before they escalated. The ritual also democratized wisdom. Unlike cultures where only shamans accessed the spirit world, here every member, from the quietest fisher to the boldest warrior, could contribute divine insights. This created a unique feedback loop. Daytime experiences shaped dreams, which then reshaped daytime decisions, forging a seamless bond between waking and sleeping life. Now, let's step from these firelit dream circles to a ritual where the end wasn't an afterthought, but the climax of the story. While the Iroquois wove dreams into daily life, the Vikings staged elaborate funeral rites that turned death into a defiant celebration. A reminder that even final goodbyes could bind the living more tightly together. The great hall roared with laughter and song, the long fires casting flickering shadows across faces flushed with mead and camaraderie. Yet when the chieftain raised the ornate drinking horn, a hush fell, not of restraint but reverence. This was the Norse Sumble, where even the raucous energy of a Viking feast could crystallize into sacred ritual with a single toast. Imagine the weight of that moment, the polished ox horn glinting in the firelight as it passed from calloused hand to hand, each participant feeling the warmth left by the last drinker's lips. What flowed within wasn't just fermented honey, it was the liquid thread stitching together past, present, and future. 3 rounds shaped the Sumble's alchemy. The first honored the gods Odin's wisdom, Thor's strength, Freya's grace spoken aloud so the rafters themselves might tremble with divine presence. The second summoned ancestors, their names invoked like embers stirred back to life. I drink to Egil one hand whose axe cleared this land. Here the dead became guests at the table, their deeds resurrected in the telling. But the third round transformed the living. Warriors and farmers alike stood, gripping the horn as they voiced binding oaths, not whispered promises, but declarations hurled into existence before witnesses both mortal and immortal. A young man might pledge to sail west by summer's end, while a grizzled hunter vowed to track the white bear haunting the fjords. These weren't idle boasts, spoken over the Sumble horn, they became cosmic contracts. Break such an oath, and you risked more than shame. You unraveled the very fabric of your honor in this life and the next. The Sumble's brilliance lay in its duality. Unlike solitary meditation or temple rites, this ritual thrived on communal energy. The same mead that loosened tongues for bawdy jokes also oiled the gears of profound commitment. Structured yet spontaneous, it allowed even the lowliest thrall to stand equal in the ritual space, their words carrying the same weight as a jarl's when the horn was in their grasp. Archaeologists find echoes of this in rune-inscribed drinking vessels from Denmark to Newfoundland, some scratched with personal vows, others bearing cryptic toasts like, "May this ale guard me against treachery." Modern gatherings still channel the Sumble spirit, from wedding toasts that inadvertently mirror the 3 rounds to fraternity initiations where shared cups forge brotherhood. But the Vikings understood something we often forget. Rituals gain power not by separating celebration from solemnity, but by braiding them together. When the horn finally emptied and laughter reclaimed the hall, every oath lingered in the smoke-heavy air, invisible but indelible, like runes carved into the world tree's roots. Now, let's set down the drinking horn and pick up another kind of vessel, one that held not mead, but the very essence of divine presence. From the raucous halls of Scandinavia, we journey to the sun-baked temples of Egypt, where the ritual of opening the mouth didn't just honor the dead, but gave them back their voices in a ceremony as meticulous as it was mystical. From blood oaths to fire festivals, these 42 rituals reveal humanity's endless creativity in forging connections. They weren't just ceremonies, they were the invisible glue holding civilizations together, turning strangers into family and chaos into order. Imagine the Scythian warrior feeling his blood mix with his brothers, or the Athenian woman laughing under the stars during the Thesmophoria, tasting freedom in forbidden jokes. These moments weren't isolated, they were threads in a vast tapestry of human ingenuity, each ritual a testament to our primal need to belong. What's astonishing isn't just their diversity, from the silent dream circles of the Iroquois to the roaring bonfires of Chahashamsuri, but their shared purpose. Whether through pain, joy, or solemn silence, every ritual sought to answer the same question: how do we transform I into we? The Viking Sumble turned mead into unbreakable vows, while the Balinese Naipe forged unity through collective stillness. Even in death, rituals like the Tibetan Sky Burial or Egyptian opening of the mouth wove the departed back into the community's fabric, proving that connection transcends even mortality. Yet here's the most striking revelation: these ancient solutions still echo in our modern lives. That morning coffee ritual, it's your personal version of the Zoroastrian fire ceremony, a small, sacred pause in a chaotic world. Family dinners mirror the Inca's Chicha feasts, where sustenance and solidarity were inseparable. And when we gather for birthdays or weddings, we're unknowingly channeling the same energy that once filled the Panathonaic festival or the Cherokee stomp dances. The tools have changed, but the longing remains. So as we close this journey, ask yourself, what rituals define your world today? Are they the fleeting likes on a screen, or something deeper? Something that makes your heart pound like a sun-dance drum, or your breath sink with others in quiet reverence? Share your thoughts below, and let's keep unraveling history's mysteries together. Don't forget to subscribe for more adventures into the past. Until next time, may your own rituals, whether grand or humble, always remind you you're never truly alone. The fire of connection still burns, we just have to tend to it.